The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. Let's talk Masque of the Red Death. No, not that one. Though that one was really fun to play in. No, I'm talking about the atmospheric horror story by our good boy, Edgar Allan Poe. First published in 1842, it's one of the many stories that Poe wrote to appeal to the public's sort of widespread excitement towards this Gothic fiction genre. Unsurprisingly, Gothic literature espouses themes of death and grief while eliciting feelings of the sublime, that sort of weird, indescribable feeling that speaks outside of a normal person's ordinary experience. Talking about the sublime as like a literary thing is probably going to have to be its own video, but suffice to say that there is like an aspect of it that deals with this grotesque, the supernatural, the horrifying, and that tantalized the modern audiences of the time. Poe, of course, wasn't the first one to deal in Gothic lit, sure, but ask anyone on the street if they know any Gothic literature, and you'll hear Dracula and the Raven, if they even know what Gothic literature is in the first place. Let's talk about the story itself. You should read it or listen to it in its entirety before you go any further, but for those of you who won't, or did a long time ago, or some other excuse, it's plot summary time. There is a horrifying disease called the Red Death that manifests, afflicts, and kills in a mere half hour. It's unclear as to whether the people in the story know very much else about it other than that the supposition is that it can spread through contact with someone or something that carries it. So, main character, Prince Prospero, is a super rich pretty boy who has castles and lands and rules over a relatively large population. But once literally half his entire kingdom has died, he handpicks 1,000 cool dudes and dudettes that I guess he assumed didn't have the disease. And then he brought everyone to this walled-off abbey that he'd set up for some crazy mad partying. The whole place was humongous, at least big enough to house 1,000 guests, plus all of the servants, and the musicians, and the dancers, and the entertainers that would be there. And then literally welded the gates shut, and told everyone that the rest of the world could sort itself out, while they, the rich folk, could just do unlimited partying until it did. All 1,000 of them decided to attend. And thus, 1,000 rich people and their host and servants were shut up in this abbey, and the party began. The story doesn't really say whether the party lasted for the entire time that they were in there, but it's sort of implied that there were at least parties all the time, during the literally 5 or 6 months that the place had been all shut up. And on this particular night, Prince Prospero sets up the probably biggest party of the isolation yet, a masquerade ball, in an imperial suite of 7 conjoined rooms. The rooms are set up in this sort of like weird twisty pattern with like a side corridor that runs along the outside walls of each of them, and it's separated from the rooms by this humongous like stained glass window. Each of those stained glass windows is a specific color. And in this hallway, they've got these huge braziers that are lit so that the rooms are cast in the light that comes through the windows in each of those colors. There's a blue, a purple, a green, an orange, a white, and a violet room, and each of those is decorated in the same color as their window to give maximum color overload. But the last room, while its window is a deep blood red, is decorated in black velvet. This is important that it's in velvet, we'll say why later, but that room also has a humongous ebony wood grandfather clock with a loud chime. It's like a really spooky room, so basically nobody goes in there for the entire party, and instead they rock out to the musicians and dancers in the rest of the 7 rooms. Now the clock chimes every hour on the hour, and it's so eerie that the whole party stops while it's chiming, because who could party during that weird, bone-chilling sound? Then when the clock stops chiming, they all just kind of, that was weird, and then start their raucous spring break party in the castle again until at midnight the clock strikes 12. And 12 grotesque chimes echo through this castellated abbey. And that takes a long time, because each of those chimes, like you've heard a grandfather clock before, you know how long it takes for them to chime several times. And then just as the revelers are about to start their partying again, someone in the blue room, the very first one, notices a new person in the room. Nobody recognizes this person. He's wearing like a blood-stained white cloak and a mask that looks like the face of a corpse, mottled with little red spots. Now, were it not for the fact that he was cosplaying as the Red Death, that kind of costume probably wouldn't have been that much of a problem. Prince Prospero, however, takes a deep offense to this reminder that outside the world is probably dying. As a result of this offense, he seeks to reveal the identity of someone whose actions are so unwelcome that he proposes to hang them from the battlements in the morning. Now, nobody has the guts to actually approach the newcomer, and so this guy just starts kind of wandering through the rooms, starting in the blue room and heading all the way down through those rooms towards the red one. Prospero's anger outmatches his horror, and he takes off after the offending party, drawing his dagger from his belt and rushing to introduce it into the masked man's anatomy intimately. When they both reach the red room, the man turns and looks at Prospero, and the prince suddenly just poof, drops dead on the floor. Seeing that their host is dead, the throng of partygoers throw themselves at this masked man and grab the mask and rip off the robe, and they find that there was nothing under those clothes at all. And then all of them got the Red Death and died in their sealed-off castle, and the party was no more. And all the rich people died. Bummer. So, that's the whole story. This is a very simple resolution, the Shakespearean everyone dies. But let's talk about what this story is actually about, and then overanalyze some of the things in it, because that's the kind of person I am. The Red Death's symptoms are brutal. There were sharp pains, and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores, with dissolution. It's pretty widely agreed that this is not a real disease that existed, but was rather a reference to real epidemics and diseases that Poe would have been experiencing at the time that he wrote it. It was especially likely to have been a reference to the disease that was at the time known as consumption, which we now know is called tuberculosis, since while Poe was writing this story, his wife was in the process of dying of TB. However, these symptoms actually do exist in real life, most strikingly the blood from the pores bit. There's a condition called hematidrosis, which is a rare but real thing wherein a person sweats blood from their pores. Episodes of this blood sweat are often preceded by intense headache and abdominal pain. It's been suggested that acute fear and extreme stress can trigger the capillaries that are feeding the sweat glands to just burst and then bleed into the gland itself and out through the pores. So there's a possibility that Poe might have heard about this affliction somehow and built his horrifying fictional disease around a much more potent and deadly version of hematidrosis. Moving on to some more interesting parts to analyze, let's talk about the black velvet. If you have ever seen real black velvet, then you know that it is very dark, and thanks to the texture of the cloth basically being like thousands of tiny little hairs, it doesn't really reflect light, basically at all. This means that you can like shine a light on a piece of black canvas and you'll see that it's like a dark gray or a dark blue or whatever, but velvet is a far darker black. Why is this important? That room is apparently designed to have the absolute most ghastly visual effects possible. Since the light comes from just one source through this stained glass and no light is reflected off any of the surfaces, it means that everything is illuminated in such a way that the visible part of a thing is a horrifying blood red and then everything else is complete darkness. This is the single coolest design for a horror room that has existed in a long time. I mean, imagine going into this room and then standing with your back to the light and then seeing anything that came into the room as this blood-red object in a sea of infinite blackness. But now face the light and see nothing but silhouettes of people moving about in this red light. That is ghastly. A perfect addition to the story's atmosphere. And a little bit metaphoric too, I should think, because at the end of it, all you see is the Red Death in this sea of blackness, and everyone starts to die. You will forgive me for the next couple minutes, I hope, but we're about to get political here. So if you want to skip anything related to current events and politics, skip to this time. You have been warned. I don't do politics much, but this is too much of a perfect corollary not to discuss. The elephant in the room is obviously the fact that as I make this video, we are currently in the grip of this global pandemic that I'm apparently not allowed to say the name of on YouTube, but you know what it is. It is a disease that spreads through human contact and can very well kill someone who has it. Our government in the United States at the time I wrote this script was talking about ending the social distancing order under which we currently are because the rich people are seeing little dips in their vast oceans of money since their non-essential businesses are closed up. The President of the United States had stated at the time of this script writing that he wanted to reopen the country to normal trade and business by Easter of this year. That is tomorrow as I record this. And it's because he wants the stock market to stop failing and the money machines to get rolling again. And this is kind of a direct corollary to what happens in this story. The Prince Prospero gathers a bunch of his friends and lets the poor die outside because they are exposed to this thing. But that's not his problem. If they weren't poor, they wouldn't be in this scenario. Why wouldn't they just get more money if they didn't want to be poor? And the friends of his are the megacorporations and the billionaires who are sad that their wallets are getting a tiny fraction lighter because of the welfare of the people getting in the way of their profits. They willingly disregard the population's concerns and only look out for their own well-being, and that means that all the people who are poorer than them die, then so be it. They will do anything to save their gigantic rad money party forever. But then, one of them catches the disease, and then every last one of them catches the disease. And 1,000 people in a big castle having a party is a great way to spread a contact-based virus, isn't it? The metaphor is slightly cloudy, because at present at least we don't have the rich literally walling themselves off in the real world. Oh wait, yeah we do! Of course, major celebrities and politicians, like Democratic nominee Joe Biden, literally disappeared into their huge mansions and told everyone else to go away while they stayed safe and isolated. Weird how, despite their huge mansions, some of them still got the virus. So, to sum up this part of the analysis, the Masque of the Red Death can be interpreted as a commentary on the class divide and how wide that divide is, and what detriment it brings to society. And also, in the end, that the rich will still die, like everyone else, even though they want to kill everyone else first. Okay, end of politics. Maybe that was a little bit too heavy-handed. We'll go back to the rest of the thing. Let's talk about the grandfather clock. It is a humongous clock made of black wood that literally acts as an early foreshadowing that something about the clock is real important to the narrative. Now, a reader gets the sense that as the clock rings and everyone stops, something is approaching, and the clock is ticking down to its arrival. It's also a reminder that even if you think you're immune to the consequences of your own actions, you will at the very least be reminded of them until you die. Every hour, the party stops cold. And when there's no party, maybe people are reminded of the eerie things that are happening outside the walls. But then someone laughs nervously, and then the music starts up again, and you're in party town. But constant reminders of the choices you made that doomed others less fortunate to their deaths, while you just party it up, are a horror story in their own right. Now, one of the tenets of this genre is a sense of isolation that adds to the growing sublime terror in this narrative. In this case, while there may be like a sweet rager with 1,000 partygoers going on, and booze and wine, that's the entire world in respect to the story, because everything outside the walls of the castle could very well be completely dead, or completely fine again, but how would anyone inside know? The walls are high, the gates are welded shut from the inside, there is no escape from the eternal party that is the Abbey. So does this mean that Prince Prospero never intended to open the gates ever again? Ostensibly, he brought in provisions enough for at least 6 months of like hard partying, and could very well have stockpiled even more than that. Plus, it's been 6 months since he started the isolation, so I guarantee some of the ladies that have been at this party are pregnant. If this keeps going, then there will be infants, and that is a huge party killer. So just what actually were his plans anyway? Did he bring in like a year's worth of stuff and expect the rest of the world to sort itself out in a year? Or did he just kind of expect that they're gonna party until they can't anymore and then go deal with it? It's kind of left vague and evocative, and vague and evocative is the best brand. The guy that shows up at midnight is also super unnerving, right? He's wearing what amounts to funerary clothes and a mask that looks like a corpse, and it's all spattered with tiny droplets of little red, like the disease would do to you. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? The party is a masquerade, so it would be remiss of any member of the party not to be masked and in costume. No, Prospero doesn't take offense to his being in costume or his being masked, but rather to the thoughts that the costume evokes. At the beginning of the story, there's this line: "With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think." In this sealed away paradise, away from the death that travels outside, it was taboo to bring up the Red Death at all. They'd been having a great time in this party for months now. How dare this person remind them of that thing that they tried so hard to forget? Prospero seriously calls for this guy to be hanged for his actions. It's a little bit of like a weird dictatorship vibe there, if you ask me. So the very notion of thinking about this thing is banned, essentially, and therefore making others think about it must also be banned. So much so that Prospero takes his knife and goes in for the kill. When Prospero dies, though, it happens immediately. He doesn't get detailed as having caught the disease. He kicks it on the spot. It's kind of weird and strange that he's the only one of the 1,000 rich people there who gets a quick, easy death. Everyone else has to go through getting the disease. I wonder if there's any significance to it, unless you think about, hey, getting into some literary analysis, the travel between all of the rooms to be Prospero having gotten the thing. Maybe he was the first person to have picked it up from this guy when he got angry at him, and the process of him being scared of approaching him and finally chasing him through the rooms and getting to the red was the half hour that was necessary. This cloaked, bloody, corpse mask figure floating through these halls where all these people are, and then Prince Prospero, so angry that he is reminded of this thing that he doesn't even realize that he has caught the disease himself, stumbling through this thing, blood coming out of his pores, like getting like all the pains and the racking and such, reaching for his dagger only at the very last minute to finally have succumbed to it. The story doesn't say that that's what happened, but that's my headcanon now. Honestly, this whole scenario kind of feels like the beginning to a rad setup for like a post-apocalyptic Victorian horror tabletop RPG. You are someone who's on the outside, who has thus far managed to stay abreast of the disease. Half the city's population has died, possibly more. You're still trying to function, but the desperation in people has started factions and revolutions and marauding and looting. And then there's the tower. This walled-off, crenellated, castellated abbey in the center of the city, where it's said that the elite retreated inside and sealed themselves off from the rest of the world to stave off the coming of the Red Death. How long has it been? Who knows? But if you are near enough to the walls and listen very close, you can hear the chiming of a clock on the hour. A chilling and haunting sound that shakes you to your bones. A lot of scholars have tried to analyze the 7 rooms and tried to determine what the colors might mean. And as a result of this bandying about and going back and forth, many even suggest to just not read the story allegorically at all. There are too many different ways to interpret the colors, so I will leave that to you to do in the comments. However, if you have seen some of my old Little Nightmares videos, you may recall that I made the claim that you can ascribe literally anything to the 7 deadly sins. Just a thought. As I'm recording this, I'm hitting 29 minutes? Jesus, that's a long video. But you know what will get you more of this discussion on stories like this one and others like it? A talk show. This is a plan only right now, but I'm working on putting together a sort of like talk show style Twitch broadcast where I can get other literary people on board to discuss Gothic literature and weird fiction and maybe some other stuff too if we feel like it. If this is something that you would watch on Twitch or maybe here, leave a comment or a like or whatever, say something so that I will know that you are at least a little bit interested in this thing. I already have a couple of the like bigger YouTube celebrity types that I want to try to get on eventually if the thing starts to work, but I need to have some episodes of this thing put together already in order to be able to show it to them and be like, would you kindly be part of this thing? So you can also down in the comments give me suggestions on like YouTubers or Twitch people or whatever that are known for storytelling or literature or tabletop games or something. And I will reach out to them and see if they are interested in doing the thing as well. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. The like and subscribe buttons are down there. There somewhere, probably over here. You can also follow my socials. There's a Facebook, there's a Twitter. There's a Discord now that I'm working from home because everyone's either working from home or unemployed right now. I'm in my Discord a lot now. So you can come hang out there if you feel like it. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it and I will see you next time.